Psalm 54. This is to the chief musician on Neginoth. It's a maskil, it's a psalm of David, when the Ziphims came and said to Saul, "Doth not David hide himself with us?" So this is a very specific time period, very specific event. Like many of these psalms, has been the catalyst, has been the spark for the psalm being written. We didn't talk about this last week, but we are in a very small, tight cluster of psalms that all fit together, 52, 53, 54, and 55. And these all relate to or provide a type of or point toward Antichrist. And they give us a glimpse of that wicked one. Psalm 54, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. Behold, God is mine helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies. Cut them off in thy truth. I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he hath delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies." So we have a short psalm here. It's fairly easy to follow along with, but we'll dig into it just a little bit. So going back up to the heading or the description of this psalm, it's to the chief musician on Neginoth. So again, that's stringed instruments. It is a maskil, as are all of the psalms from 52 to 55, meaning it's an instructional psalm. And this is a psalm of David when the Ziphims came and said to Saul, "Doth not David hide himself with us?" So that occurs if we go back to 1 Samuel chapter 26. 1 Samuel chapter 26, and this is just after the events of David dealing with Nabal in his home and marrying Abigail, who was Nabal's wife previous to his death, prior to his death. 1 Samuel chapter 26, beginning in verse 1, it says, "And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul pitched in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness." So this is the story where, we're not going to read this whole thing, but we read this story. There's a couple different points where David has the opportunity to just take Saul out, just completely unawares. Just Saul is either sleeping or otherwise indisposed. David knows. David is there. David is present. David is very close to him. He's close enough to get the job done, and he doesn't do it. This is the period where essentially David and his men, they sneak into this camp, and Saul is sleeping in the camp along with his men, including Abner, the son of Ner, which Abner, he's famous because we know about him from the story of Joab and his family, and he's running away, sticks the spear out behind him as he's running away, and kills the boy, and runs away to a city of the refuge. Yes. Words are escaping me this morning. I was looking for another word, sanctuary. So that's Abner, skilled warrior, extremely. I mean, that's why Saul's got him in charge. I mean, he's a man of battle, but he's there sleeping like a baby, vulnerable as can be. Saul, king of all Israel, in the camp, sleeping like a baby, vulnerable as can be. David has the ability to end it, but he won't do it for the same reason that he didn't do it when they were hiding in the caves. And he refused to take Saul's life at that time. And David never takes Saul's life. Saul ends up falling on his own sword in battle after being wounded. So, going forward back to Psalms, we see that this is the point in time where this occurs. And the problem that David has here is these Ziphims or Ziphites, people who live in the area in the wilderness and in and around Ziph, they go and what do? Well, we read about it. They go and they tell Saul, hey, isn't David hiding over there? Is he not hiding in our territory? He's right here. Saul, king, yoo-hoo. You know. What reason would they have to do that? What has David done to them? He's done nothing to them at this time. But they've got a reason. They see an opportunity. They see King Saul is out to get this man. King of all Israel. What would we get if we could get him to owe us a favor? And so from David's perspective, we're going to read this again here in Psalm 54. Save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. He begins calling out to God. He's in distress. He's distraught. Verse 3, for strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. Now, to David, it appears that, they've done this thing, and it's going bad for him. So from his perspective, strangers are risen up against me. Are they really rising up against David? Or are they rising up for Saul? Or more specifically, for themselves? From David's perspective, he's seeing this as all these people are all out to get him. And he's got good reason for that, because there are a lot of people who tried to kill him. And Saul's got everybody, pretty much everybody on payroll trying to get and run down David. But these Ziphims, it's not as if they have anything personal or anything, any specific grudge against David. What's that line? It's just business. It's just business. So it's a bloody business, but it's a business deal that they're making here. But you see why David would think, for these strangers, they're risen up against me. Everybody's turning against me. It's because they have that self-interest. They have that greed. They have that love of money. That love of money that is the root of all evil. So he says, they have not set God before them. And he's right about that. He's right about that, because if they had God as their number one priority, they know, like David, you ought not to harm the Lord's anointed. That's why David won't take out Saul, because he was, at least at one point in time, he was anointed to be king. Now, there's an interesting story as well on that, because we know that Saul couldn't wait for Samuel. But that might be another time. So he was a bit impatient. Verse 4 says, behold, God is mine helper, the Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in thy truth. So he's saying here, I know God's going to get the victory. I know he's the one that's going to claim this battle. I know he's the one that's going to win. He says in verse 6, I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he hath delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies. And so he begins this psalm, and he's distraught. He's terrified. He's sickened. You could just imagine, well, here's another group of people that hates me. Here's another group of people that they don't want anything to do with me. That's got to be disheartening. It really does. I mean, David is a man, he's a really good example of somebody who it's just going wrong. It's like every step he takes, something's going wrong. Some of that he can blame on himself. But some of that is the workings of his enemies and the workings, I believe, of Satan behind the scenes in these things. But he moves on, and he recognizes there's a problem, he recognizes there's a threat, and then in verses 4 through 7 he says, well, God's going to take care of it. I just got to trust in him. That's my only hope. I mean, that's the only thing we can do at this point. Trust in him. He's going to deliver me. He's done it so far. I'm going to praise him. I'm going to freely sacrifice unto him. He is good, and that's the right thing to do. So that's what I'm going to do. So that's a fairly simple psalm here, but the idea here is that you place David into the position, and David is often a type of Israel during the tribulation period. And you see that's what's happening with Israel. It's like everywhere you turn, somebody's turning against them. It's like every time they take a step, somebody else, some other nation decides to side with the Antichrist. Some other nation decides to turn on them. Some other nation decides to betray them. And it's not specifically, while there is a lot of it out in the world, it's not just that, well, we hate the Jewish people. That's not really what it's all about. It's not just, the Jewish people have some kind of magnet that attracts people toward them that hates them, while there is some of that. It's that the other nations, they've got interests that they're trying to meet. They're trying to make a business deal with the Antichrist. The Antichrist is one who controls the economy at that time. He's the one who supposedly got all the answers at that time. What are they going to do? Well, they don't have God. They have not set God before them. Same thing. It's not that there's all these people that just personally hate. All the individuals or personally hate the nation of Israel. Again, there's a lot of that. There is a lot of that in the world, but you're going to have nations all over the earth that don't have one bit of care for the nation of Israel. It's not like they're not in the same sphere. It doesn't affect them. Yet, they're going to be making deals against Israel just because it benefits them. They see the way the world's going, they're going to follow the world. So, it's just going to make sense at that time. And it makes sense because they're not following God. They're not following his will. And they don't care to. They don't. So David here again, type of Israel here in the tribulation period. We can, if there are no comments or questions, we're going to move on to Psalm 55. I'll leave it open for a couple moments. Again, like I said, that one was pretty simple, pretty short, pretty sweet. So, all right, no comments or questions. We will move on to Psalm 55. This one is to the chief musician on Neginoth, a maskil. It's a psalm of David. Again, it's meant to be played upon stringed instruments. It's another instructional psalm. This one's a bit longer, so it's going to take a little bit more time, but we'll attempt to get through it here. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander far off, and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief and also in sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hid myself from him. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell. For wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning, and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. God shall hear and afflict them, because even he that abideth of old, Selah. Because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. So, when we read the heading of this psalm, the description, we don't see a specific time period. We don't see a specific event that triggers David to write this psalm. However, we have a pretty good idea of when he wrote it, or at least a time point that we can say he would have written it after this. Between this point and his death, that it would have been in that section of time that he would have written it. Not before, but in that section of time. And that would have been in some of the events that occur in 2 Samuel. We'll go back and we'll see a couple of these as we go through. But first we'll return back to verse 1. It says, Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. And so the first thing we see is that David's got a problem. And how many psalms begin with David having a problem? Well, I don't know the number, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So we'll look here. It says, Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. David's got a problem, and he's got something to say about it. He's asking the Lord for help. He says, I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. He says, Lord, I need to tell you about this problem that I've got. He says, because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. Again, like I said, we have some examples, both in Scripture about David's enemies and in Scripture about the enemies of the nation of Israel at the time of the tribulation. And while in the last psalm that we read, we kind of move toward the perspective of those that kind of are on the outside looking in. They don't really have anything to do with David, or by extension, they don't have anything to do with Israel, the nation of Israel in the tribulation period, and so they're just kind of following their own interests. This is the other group. This is the group that has a real grudge of some kind, for whatever reason. A real problem of some kind, for whatever reason, with David, by extension, with the nation of Israel. Talking about those that absolutely are set against him. The oppression of the wicked, they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And so, this is not, I'm not going to tell you exactly when I think this is occurring, but I'll tell you when it's not occurring. I don't believe this has anything to do with Saul. I don't believe this has anything to do with any of the events that occurred before David became king. What I'll say now is this is definitely something that's going on after he became king. we look at verse 6, it says, "And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." So pair that with verses 4 and 5 again. It says, "My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me." Now, I'll be honest, I haven't gone through in our study of the book of Psalms all 150 Psalms yet, so I can't say with 100% certainty that David hasn't used this other kind of language in another psalm, after Psalm 55. But this kind of language that he's used, he's come close, he's gotten there, but these specific words and this specific type of dread that he's describing, he hasn't exactly described. He hasn't really described himself being in horror. He's described himself as being sick, as afraid that he was going to die, but he's fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. To the point where he says, "And I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." I'm not planning to turn this psalm into a lesson on confronting your problems and facing your fears and attacking the enemy head on. You can learn that from this psalm, and I think you can see that when you look at verse 7. "Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest." He's kind of wishing, if I could just get away from the problem. I'd just go, I'd get as far away as I can, I'd get away from this storm, I'd just live in the wilderness and wouldn't worry about it anymore. I'd be all alone, out there, not connected to anybody. That's not a way you can really actually go about living your life. And so while I said I'm not turning this psalm into that kind of lesson this morning, since it's here and since it's very prevalent and since I think it's important, just wanted to bring that up because David here, he's got this great fear and trembling, and he just wants to get away. His first instinct is to run. That reminds me, and I wasn't planning on talking about this morning, so we might actually spend more time on this than I thought I was going to, but I was at a conference this past week in Cincinnati, and it was a conference put on by the Ohio Government Finance Officers Association, so it was very, very fun. Extremely riveting topics, talking about government finance and state of the economy and, how does a school go about getting debt or how does a city go about starting up this new project, all kinds of fascinating things. That's sarcasm. But the keynote on the very first day was called "Overcoming Life's Goliaths." And interestingly enough, the person who put it on, while I didn't really detect that he had any actual connection to the Holy Spirit, just from his mannerisms, actions, and the way he was speaking, he drew quite a lot from Scripture. And he used Scripture almost basically throughout that entire speech that he gave. And it was interesting for somebody, it didn't quite feel like a church service, but it's probably about the closest thing you're going to get out in the world. So it was nice. But his thing was about overcoming life's Goliaths. You've got problems, and you need to address those problems, whether those be in your professional life or in your personal life. Everything's going to come, whatever's going on, it's going to affect your work. It's going to affect your ability to be productive. So that's sort of what it was about. One of the things he mentioned, because we talk about David being brave and strong, and he was really, really on fire for the Lord at this time. On that last day, when they're meeting in the valley for negotiations, they were doing it for 30 days. On that last day, they came, and that's when Goliath came and presented the challenge. Send out your finest warrior. We'll duke it out. That'll decide what happens here. And Goliath, the giant, he'd go through that ceiling. Everybody was scared. Everybody. David just happened to be there because he was delivering food to his brothers. And we'll move through this quickly so we can get back through and get through this psalm. But when that happened and when the negotiations broke down, what happened? All Israel, they fled and the dust rose. I mean, they hightailed it out of there. They did. All Israel. They ran. They saw a problem. They turned around and they ran from it. They didn't attack it head on. They didn't overcome it. They didn't trust in the Lord. They saw this problem. They turned around. They fled. Kicked up the dust behind them. They made no... There was no waste in their haste. David ran too. He was part of that group. All Israel was there. They were there. They ran back. David hadn't yet, decided to trust in the Lord on that occasion. Now, whenever he had thought about it, whenever he'd gotten down into it, whenever he'd, kind of heard more about the details, and whenever he'd heard more about this challenge, and figured out, he gets this, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That's what he thinks. He changes his perspective and he says, who's this that's coming against the Lord? He doesn't see it as, this man's mocking Israel. He doesn't see it as this man's mocking, me personally or my brothers or my king. He says he's going against the Lord. Who does he think he is? The Lord's going to win this battle. And that's how he goes about it after that. And the rest of that time, that's what's in his mind. He's thinking, he's Goliath is David doesn't see himself as the enemy of Goliath. He just sees himself as the Lord's weapon against Goliath. He says, Lord, I'm going to let you use me, and we're going to do this thing, and I'm going to trust you, and that's how it's going to be. This man's coming against you, and you can't have that, so let's do something about it. That's kind of his thoughts on it. And so there's no hesitation there. All Israel ran. And I say that David ran, if that's, we don't get much personally on David, but it's not as though he was filled with fear. But if he had been in the camp at that time, everybody ran. Everybody ran. And so it's not as though that David is specifically running away from Goliath there, but that's kind of the picture that we get, is that when he thinks about it and he says, no, Goliath isn't coming up against Israel, he's coming up against God, that's when we know. That's when we see that we have an issue here. All of David's brothers ran. Everybody did. Saul, the man who should have fought Goliath, he ran. But when you shift your vision and you say, we're going to trust in the Lord, that's what you got to do. So we'll get back in here, and I'll make one more comment on this. Verse 6, and I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, and I'm not going to outright recommend it from up here, I think it's got its moments of clarity and humor, but there's a scene toward the beginning of the movie where little Forrest is with little Jenny, and they're growing up, and we see that Jenny lives in a home where she is being treated poorly. I'm not going to go into the details, but if you've seen the movie, you know that she had a father that was abusive towards her in more ways than one, and we'll leave it there. There was a point where you see her, she's outside, Forrest comes over, he wants to play with her, and she's been abused by her father at this point. And she takes Forrest into the cornfield, and they run away. Her dad wakes up, he's trying to get out, he's got a bottle of liquor in his hand, so he's not in good shape, prepared probably to continue doing whatever he was going to do before. And she runs, And she and Forrest kneel in that field, and she says, "Dear God, make me a bird so that I can fly far, far, far away from here. Dear God, make me a bird so that I can fly far, far, far away from here." That's the thing that comes to my mind when I read what David says here. "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." And while that picture that we get in that movie is a horrible thing, and you see that the way that she deals with that is not a healthy way throughout the rest of the movie. She doesn't continue to rely on God throughout the rest of the movie. She ends up getting involved in all kinds of worldly things instead. And so there's problems that come from that. I'm not teaching a lesson on Forrest Gump, so we'll end that analogy there. But, you can't just trust in God once and then everything's just going to work out. You got to continually place your trust in Him. And you know that from Christian life. Yeah, we trusted in Him to save us, and He saved us, but we're still here. We're still here. Trusting in Him to save you doesn't really, when you've got a problem here, it's not the same event. It's not the same trust. It's a different trust. It's a different. It's a continuing relationship and a continuing fellowship that needs maintained. You don't trust in Him in that one point in time and then expect that everything's going to go well from there on out, and that He's just going to be there. You've got to put in your part into that fellowship. You've got to stay connected with Him. Draw nigh unto Him, and He will draw nigh unto you. So we see that we have to continually trust in Him. You have a new problem rise up, you got to turn that problem over to Him. You have a new fear rise up, turn that fear over to Him. A new enemy rise up, turn that enemy over to Him. And I know that that's what you should do. One, because Scripture tells us that. Two, because if you don't do it, and you try to handle it all by yourself, which I have done, and which I'm sure everybody in this room has done, you see how that goes. When you just nonchalantly go about trying to solve your own problems, and not really involving God in it, not really seeking His counsel first, not really seeking His solutions first. Those problems you may solve it for a time, but your solution may bring on a completely unexpected problem that's even worse. Or you may not solve it and it may blow up in your face. But we ought to be seeking His counsel continually. We ought to be continually placing trust into Him. Continually seeking His wisdom. Continually seeking His will. So, we see that David here, from verses 1 through 8, he's going through this. He's got this problem, and he just wants to get away from it. He's turning it over to the Lord, but then he's also saying, I just wish I could get away from it altogether. Now, here's the issue. Yes, you cast your burdens on Him. You cast your cares on Him. And it's not supposed to be a burden to you anymore. That doesn't mean it's not still there. Doesn't mean it's just gone. Doesn't mean you don't have something you have to do in response to it. And David is here, and you understand as a human being why he would have that attitude, why he would say, I just want to get away from this, Lord. Just take it away from me, and I don't want it anymore. Just get it away from me. You understand that, but that's not how the Lord works. You ask God to solve your problem of impatience. If you're an impatient person, He's just not going to just, shoot you with a syringe full of patience. That's not how that works. What does He do? He makes you go through situations and go through things that you have to practice patience in. Because that's how you gain patience. You practice it. You make it a habit to be patient. You make it a habit not to fly off the handle in a given situation. You make it a habit not to raise your voice in a given situation. You make it a habit to remain calm and passive in a given situation. Which means you go through all kinds of situations that normally would fire you up, that normally would turn you into a creature that you don't like very much after about 5 minutes of reflecting on your actions. That's how the Lord works. And so we get into verse 9 here. It says, "Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hid myself from him. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide, and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked unto the house of God in company." And so this is a man who's turned on David, that was somebody that was very close to him, somebody that gave him counsel. It says, walked unto the house of God in company. They prayed together. They worshiped together. They praised together. They were friends. And this is the person who's turned on David at this time. And so, while it doesn't say so in the psalm, I believe this is a specific reference to a man by the name of Ahithophel. Ahithophel. You read about him in 2 Samuel, and we're going to read about him just a little bit. And we're going to try to do this quickly. I spent more time on David and Goliath than I had planned. And by more time, that was, 1 second and above, because that just was unplanned completely. 2 Samuel, and in chapter 15, 2 Samuel chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 10 here. It says, 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 10, "But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, where he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. And there came a messenger to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom." And that's when you see here that David flees Israel. That Jerusalem has turned toward Absalom, turned against David, and so he flees out into the countryside. And he gets away out in the countryside. And this man Ahithophel, it says in verse 12, "And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong." And so this man Ahithophel, who had counseled David, who had been his helper, turns on him completely. Completely. And you can't even really necessarily say this is a great business deal. The reason for that is you have to consider risk in that. Ahithophel what's he going to do? Continue to be Absalom's counselor when he's already David's counselor? He's already friends with the king. He's just going to be friends with the next king. He's not really going to be in that much of a better off place. Yet what he's doing, he's completely throwing away his entire previous life. Everything he ever was, he's throwing away for this chance here to do what? And so here, there's got to be something personal with David. There's got to be something personal, because it's not like the Ziphims, where you can kind of understand what they were getting at. You could make an argument that they were trying to do the right thing in Psalm 54, reading about those Ziphims. You've got this man here who's on the run from the king. We've got to respect our king. He's the ruler. He's the one. He's the one who's in charge of the law. We've got to follow the law. We've got to do what's right. Now, Saul's not following God. If you know that, then you know that it's wrong to do what he says if you know that it's wrong. But that being said, You can see how somebody could make that argument. You can't find that with Ahithophel. This was David's friend, and he completely does a 180-degree turn. He repents in the wrong direction. That's what he does. And so you see David, he goes up to the Mount Olivet. Starting in verse 30 here in 2 Samuel 15, it says, "And David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up, weeping as they went up. And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." And so, first thing he does is he prays. He hears that his friends turned on him, and he says, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. He doesn't pray death upon Ahithophel at this time. He doesn't pray suffering or anything like that. He just says, Lord, just whatever he says, turn it into foolishness. Why? Because he knows Ahithophel is an opponent here. He knows that he's a strong opponent. Why? Because he's received counsel from him for years. And so he knows that Ahithophel, if Absalom's getting counsel from Ahithophel, then it's going to be kind of difficult. He says, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. We can see that he did. We can see that God answered that prayer, and he answered it pretty quick. We go to 2 Samuel 16. 2 Samuel 16, verse 20. It says, Then said Absalom to Ahithophel, Give counsel among you what we shall do. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, Go in unto thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. And the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel born with David and with Absalom. And so Ahithophel made it seem like he was consulting at the oracle of God, that all of his counsel was good and pure and right. But here you see that his counsel here is just to be foolish. What would have been better counsel? Maybe track down your father and put an end to this and take the throne fully and completely. But instead he says, okay, go make a show. Make a show on the rooftop for the people of Israel so that they know that you're just taking over your father's concubines. Now this sounds like something that would sound really appealing to a young man about Absalom's age. It sounds really appealing to him. He thinks, I get to put one over on my dear old dad, and I get to do this with his concubines? I'm in. So he's not thinking about it. Ahithophel here, he's given David counsel. He should know better, but I believe that God has answered David's prayer of turning his counsel into foolishness. Because what does this really accomplish? It might make him, he's the pretty boy of the town. People already know him as that. What's this going to do? It's not going to make him, be more of the pretty boy, the more of the man, the woman's man. Not really. It's just a waste. And it's a sin that goes against God. It's a sin that comes back on him. So it's foolishness. So now we're going to try to get through this very, very quickly back to Psalms, and we'll have to go back and read one more thing about Ahithophel before we conclude. But back to Psalms, we see that David says, it's a man mine equal, my guide and mine acquaintance, that we took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. He says, let death seize upon them and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. And so he's trusting in God here. He's returning to trust in God. He's saying, Lord, defeat my enemies. Lord, I'm going to trust in you. Lord, I'm going to spend my time with you. I'm not going to just run away from the problem. I'm going to cry out to you. I'm going to run to you. And he says, let death seize upon them. Well, what happened to Ahithophel? What ended up happening to old Ahithophel? We look at 2 Samuel chapter 17. 2 Samuel chapter 17. And we look at verse 17 here is where we'll start. Not verse 17, verse 20. It says, and when Absalom's servants came to the woman to the house, they said, where is Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said unto them, they be gone over the brook of water, and when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. And it came to pass, after they were departed, that they came up out of the well, and went and told King David, and said unto David, arise, and pass quickly over the water, for thus hath Ahithophel counseled against you. Then David arose, and all the people that were with him, and they passed over Jordan by the morning light. There lacked not one of them that was not gone over Jordan. And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his ass, and arose, and got him to his house, to his city, and put his household in order, and hanged himself, and died, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father. He said, David survived, I lost, it's over. That's all there is to it. You got to at least admire a little bit about Ahithophel. He wasn't like Judas Iscariot and went and found the quick first tree that he could find, first plot of land that he could find to hang himself on. He goes home, he sets his household in order. How long did that take? That could have taken days. To get all your affairs in order, get your will set up, get your last testament set up. He went home, got everything in order, and he said, okay, I'm done, out. Hanged himself. Why? Because he knew he'd lost. God had turned his counsel into foolishness. So, verse 19, back in Psalm 55, God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old, Selah, because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. And so David here is recognizing that Ahithophel was his friend for a time, but really underneath it all, war was in his heart. Words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. And this is a picture of the Antichrist, who appears to be on the side of everybody, who appears to be the savior of the world, who appears to have all the solutions, who appears to be a good counselor, appears to be wise, and yet has war in his heart, and his words are drawn swords. He says, cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. And that's how he ends up, but I will trust in thee. So that is Psalm 55. Any quick comments or questions?